This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is the 2nd of May, 2025, and I am interviewing Ms. Sarah Kegerreis. This interview is taking place at Terrell State Hospital. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Terrell State Hospital collection. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Thank you, Joe. I'm looking forward to talking about Terrell State Hospital.
Well, thank you. Can you share a little bit about your background before you came to work at the hospital?
Sure. I have a degree to teach school. When I did my student teaching, I figured that I didn't really want to teach school, but I needed a job. And teaching jobs were hard to find in 1968 when I graduated and was looking for a job. I found a job in West Texas near Big Spring, and some friends, I lived in Big Spring, and some friends suggested that I go out to the state hospital and apply for a job. And I did, and I got a job teaching chronic schizophrenics adult basic education. If you can imagine that.
Right, that sounds interesting.
Well, I never did that job.
Oh.
Before I actually went on the payroll, the personnel department called me back and said, "We have a job that's open that we think you'd be really good at." And I said, "Okay, what is it?" And they said, "It's the Assistant Director of Volunteer Services." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure what that person does." And they asked me to come for an interview. The lady that was the head of the department was delightful. Her name was Mary Cochran. She took me under her wing. I took that job. Didn't take the teaching job, didn't teach chronic schizophrenics adult basic education, but took that job. And I worked there 2 years, and she allowed me to try things and took me to conferences so that I learned about the state hospital system. I learned about what volunteers could do to augment services in a state hospital. I didn't like living in Big Spring. I grew up in East Texas, and Big Spring was just not where I wanted to be.
Right.
And so I decided that I would just turn in my resignation and see about doing something else that I could do back in East Texas. The superintendent, Preston Harrison, called me in and he said, "Sarah, you don't need to quit. You can go anywhere you want to go. You're not attached. And put in for a transfer." And so I agreed to do that and went back home to my family. And in probably about 4 or 5 weeks, I got a call that there was a job opening for the Director of Volunteer Services here at Terrell State Hospital. And I came for an interview. And it was probably the most intensive interview anybody has ever been through. I interviewed with the Director of Personnel, with the superintendent, with the assistant superintendent, with the Director of Nursing.
Wow.
And ultimately with the Volunteer Services Council, which was the group that managed the money and some of those things for volunteer services, the donation part of it. Took the job and loved every minute I worked here.
Wow. How long did you work at Big Spring?
I worked 2 years there.
I see.
And then 29 years at Terrell.
Now, where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Longview and lived there 2 weeks. And my father didn't think my mother could take care of me by herself because he traveled.
Oh, I see.
And we moved to Commerce where my grandparents were. So Commerce was always home, but my father was in the oil business and we moved quite a bit, but we always came back to Commerce as home.
Is your mom stay-at-home mom?
My mother was a teacher.
Okay.
And she didn't teach as long as I was growing up. And then she did substitute teaching.
I see. Before joining the hospital staff, did you have any mental health experience?
I had no mental health experience. I had been a volunteer. When we lived in Shreveport, I volunteered with a youth group at the general hospitals. So I had some volunteer knowledge. And my mother was a volunteer. My father volunteered for different things through his business. and his own personal interests. So I knew what volunteers were.
Yeah.
I knew the kinds of things they could do to make people's lives better.
What were your, first of all, what were your expectations of working in the mental health field?
Well, when I went to work in Big Spring, I had no expectations. I had no idea what I was getting into. But like I said, the lady who was the head of the department took me under her wing and really taught me and things to do and not do, things to say and not say. And of course, everybody goes through an orientation to learn. And there was continuing education all the time. Ultimately, I met a psychologist, so I learned a lot more about mental health.
Okay, and what were your impressions then starting out in Big Spring, and then when you came here, what changed? What was different?
Well, the size of the hospital, for one thing. The hospital in Big Spring was much smaller, probably about 500 or 600 patients.
Okay.
And when I came here, there were between 27 and 2,900 patients.
Wow,
It
that's
was
incredible.
It was kind of like jumping out of the fire, out of the frying pan into the fire.
Right.
Because there were
imagine.
so many patients. And all of the buildings were full of patients, overflowing.
How did your friends and family react to your decision to go to work at a behavioral health hospital?
Well, as I grew up, my family always said to me when I didn't behave, and that was probably more often than I'd like to admit, that if I didn't behave, I was going to end up in Terrell State Hospital. That's where they were going to take me.
Wow, right.
So when I got the job, I called my mother and father and told them, I said, well, your wish has come true. I'm going to be in Terrell State Hospital as an employee.
Did you follow it on with as an employee,
I
or did you
did.
let that sit for a minute?
I probably let it sit for a minute, but they knew I was looking for a job.
And what was their reaction?
Well, they were thrilled to have me close to them.
Oh, good.
They had really no qualms. They knew I could take care of myself.
So, what was a typical day like when you first came to work here? What did it look like for you?
Well, I can tell you what my very first day was.
Okay.
The building no longer stands. It had been, I believe, the laundry. It was an old two-story stucco yellow building, ugly, ugly, ugly. And there were four of us. There was myself and a secretary and two assistants. And tall ceilings, taller than these. And I heard this noise outside the window, and I went to the end of my office and pulled the curtain back, and there was a large piece of road equipment across the street digging a hole in the ground. And I just went to the lady in the next office and I said, what is that hole they're digging out there? And she said, that's the swimming pool the Volunteer Council's building, and you're going to have to raise the rest of the money to pay for it.
Really?
I was shocked.
I bet.
Nobody in all the interviews that I had ever mentioned a swimming pool or that I was going to need to raise the money for the rest of it to finish building the swimming pool. The swimming pool no longer exists.
Oh.
But
they did build it.
We did build it.
Okay.
We did build it.
Where did you go to school? Where did you go to college?
In Commerce.
Okay.
It was East Texas State University when I went there. It's now part of the A&M system.
And what was your degree in?
I have a bachelor's degree in education with an emphasis on home economics.
And did you ever use your degree?
Never taught school a day.
Wow. So tell me about your primary responsibilities and roles here at the hospital when you came to work here.
Well, managing volunteers, and there is an organization that still exists, the Volunteer Services Council, and those were volunteers from the community that helped plan programs, promote programs, recruit volunteers. recruiting and training volunteers was a major responsibility. There were a large number of volunteers in existence at the hospital. The American Red Cross out of Dallas had actually started the program in Terrell. There were 13 original Gray Ladies that started in the late 50s, and they volunteered here at the hospital. And there were a lot of community volunteers in Terrell that came and volunteered doing various things. All of the service organizations in Terrell were very active, as well as some churches. And a number of churches outside of Terrell would come and do things. When I asked you about the mannequin with the uniform on it,
Yes.
that uniform was the one that the lady that organized the Gray Ladies in '58 wore. And she was truly my mentor when I moved to Terrell.
I see.
She just took me under her wing and introduced me to people in Terrell, and made sure that people knew who I was and what I was doing. And we had a great relationship. Not only did we have the working relationship as volunteer director and her as a volunteer, but we became very close friends.
Very good. What year was that you came to work here?
I came in January of 1970.
How would you describe the work environment and the culture at the time that you came to work here?
In that era, all of the employees were friends. Everybody pitched in and worked together. And I'm not sure what the environment is now.
Sure.
But I know it's a much smaller number of patients and a much larger number of employees.
Right.
There weren't near as many employees in that era. And of course, the lawsuit came along, and the number of employees had to increase because the number of patient to staff ratio made a big change with the lawsuit. We enjoyed working together. If we had activities in the evening for patients, employees often would volunteer to come and help with the activities.
Okay.
I can remember baseball games that employees were a team and patients were a team.
Wow.
And it was great fun. It was really great fun.
What was the lawsuit that you're referring to?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I cannot remember the name of the lawsuit.
The result was an increase in staff to patient
Staff,
ratio.
yes. I'm sure James can tell you all about it.
Okay.
Be sure and ask him about the
will.
lawsuit.
So share with me some of your most memorable stories as an employee here.
Oh, gee.
Other than the swimming pool.
Not only was I responsible for the volunteer activities and raising money for a number of things that I can share with you that we raised money for that the state couldn't pay for. With the separation of church and state, the All-Faith Chapel was not something that the hospital or the state could build. They could maintain it, they could hire an employee, but they could not build the physical building. The chapel, main part of the chapel had been completed, and ultimately the chaplaincy program grew and there was a need for some more space. We raised money to add to that. I think the hospital still leases the property at Lake Tawakoni, and they took patients on day outings out there. And at one point we decided we'd build a lodge and some cabins, and they could do some overnight activities.
Wow.
I had all these in my head, and I can't remember now.
You just take your time.
What else we raised money for? Christmas was a big project at the state hospital. Every patient, when there were 2,700 patients, every single patient got a Christmas gift.
Wow.
And they were all donated. Everything, we raised money to buy things, and then churches and organizations donated things to go in those boxes. And I work with a group now that donates to the hospital at Christmas time. And I came this year, and the staff was kind of overwhelmed preparing for 300 patients. And I said,
Right.
I just want to share a story with you. Because, when I worked here early on in the 70s, and we had 2,600 or plus or minus patients,
Right.
every patient got a Christmas box just like they do now. And they said, eyes got big, and they said,
Right.
when did you start?
Right.
And I said, well, letters went out in September asking for donations. And we worked nights, we worked weekends. We had volunteers that came in and helped. And you worked till you finished.
Right. So what were some of the major challenges that you faced in your job?
Acceptance of some people in the community.
Meaning what?
Well, there was a stigma, still is some stigma, not near as much as there was. We had a youth volunteer program in the summertime, and there were parents who wouldn't let their children come and volunteer because they were afraid. And we were very careful where we placed volunteers. Staff would let their children come and volunteer. The superintendent's children volunteered. They grew up here and lived here, so it was just natural for them to volunteer. And I did a lot of community speaking, part of the job was public information. We did newsletters and press releases, stories, and that kind of thing to try to help educate people. I don't remember now exactly what the service district is, but back then we had a lot of counties we served. Like upwards of 30 counties that we served.
Wow, really?
So that was a lot of territory to cover. As we moved along through the era and community service we came into being, and then that was a good connection for the hospital into the community to get that community involved in the volunteer programs and volunteering to do some things for the patients in the outpatient areas.
I see.
Not as much as we did in the hospital, but we tried to get them involved at that level.
Did you have an opportunity to build relationships with patients
Not
who were
really.
here?
Not really.
Not for you.
I didn't have a lot of patient contact.
I see.
I'd go on a ward and take a group to tour, or I would go on a ward to take a group to party, to do a birthday party or a Christmas party or that kind of thing. But it was one of those things, I was just in and out. So there was never really a relationship with patients.
I see. Is there any patient that you came into contact with that you have a vivid memory of?
Well, I wouldn't dare name them.
Right.
My husband was a psychologist.
I see.
Here.
Okay.
And he had a young lady as a patient that had a very hard time. And years after she was discharged, she got back in contact with him to let her know how she had turned her life around and how grateful she was to him.
Wow.
And we still correspond with her.
That's
and keep up
wonderful.
with
That's
her
got to be
children.
gratifying. That's amazing.
But that was not really my
Sure.
contact.
Right. Well,
But-
so how did you meet your husband, and how did your marriage come about?
Well, we met in Big Spring. He was
Oh, okay.
an intern getting his master's degree at Texas Tech, and then I came to Terrell. He stayed in Big Spring. He went back to school and got his doctorate. And we stayed in contact a little through time, but eventually we dated more. And actually, we married in the chapel here on the grounds.
Is that right? And how long have you been married now?
It'll soon be 54 years.
That's amazing. That's really amazing.
And we had, the chapel is named for Winton Gable, who was the only chaplain. He was the chaplain when I came here and retired while I was here. And he and his assistant chaplain married us because we couldn't decide. We knew we'd hurt somebody's feelings if we didn't have both of them.
Right. So, are there any significant events that occurred that had impact on the hospital while you were here?
Well, the lawsuit was a major impact. Moving from all inpatient to the community services model made a huge difference in numbers of patients and the number of staff. I think those were the two significant changes.
What difference did that make?
When they went to the community service model, patients were seen in an outpatient setting. They were given medication primarily, not a lot of therapy. And the next thing you knew, the patients were on the street again.
Wow.
And that just was hard to see happen.
Why do you think that happened? Was it
I don't know.
the level of care that they were
I don't
receiving
know.
changed?
I don't know. I really don't know. But, you hear about street people now, and you
Yes.
see street people that obviously are not mentally well. And a lot of them don't want treatment. I have a very good friend who works with homeless people. And, they try to get them to seek treatment, and they don't want treatment. Or they'll go and they'll not follow up with their appointments.
Right.
So that was a hard change for me personally. I don't think being in a hospital is necessarily where you need to be, and I'm not sure that we'll ever get that fixed.
How did you cope with the emotional and psychological stresses of working in a state hospital?
I really considered my job a 24/7 job because of the public information component of it. If something happened and bad, quote unquote, that we wanted to have media presence for, I needed to do that whenever it happened.
Yes.
Whether it was Saturday, Sunday, 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock. But I had enough other interests and friends, and I stayed busy even when I was single. And then once I was married, we had things that we wanted to do and that kind of thing. So I never really carried the burden home with me. I worried sometimes, am I going to have enough money?
What support systems did they have for the staff at the time you were here to help you deal with the challenges of your job?
I really don't remember any in that era. They had a lot of staff development. And you went to staff development and learned, how to protect yourself if someone approached you inappropriately. But as far as dealing with your own mental health, I don't remember anything. Physical care of yourself was the primary thing.
Right.
Because there was such a large number of people.
Right.
Just anytime we had an activity, you'd have a whole lot of people, 100 or more patients.
Right.
If you had a party for them, or a baseball game, or you went swimming, or took them on a field trip. There was just a large number of people.
Would you say that the environment, though, among the employees was supportive?
Yes, I certainly would. People were friends. I mean, Terrell is still a small town, but the hospital was a small town.
In and of itself.
In and of itself.
Right.
Because I know you've heard about, when they raise their own crops, when they raise their own animals, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Employees living on the grounds.
And employees living on the grounds.
Did you ever live on the grounds?
Briefly, I lived in the nurses' quarters.
I see.
At one point, when my husband was still in school finishing his doctorate, I decided that I would move to Lubbock and turned in my resignation and lived out there about 2 months. And the person they hired did not work out. And they called and asked if I would come back, would consider coming back. And I said, well, I'll have to talk to my husband about that and see. And it ended up that the superintendent called, and John was going to have to do an internship to finish his doctorate in psychology. And he said, I think I can get him an internship at the medical school if you all will come. And I'll put him on the payroll until the internship starts.
Wow.
So I came back and lived in the nurses' quarters till he finished that semester of school. And then we moved here and been here ever since.
Wow.
So,
That's a lot different than the work environment in general.
Sure it is. Sure it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting how much that's changed. How did working at the hospital influence your perspective of mental health in general?
Oh, golly. It makes me want to take care of myself.
Right.
And help my friends. I think I'm a much more sympathetic person than I was. When people are dealing with hard issues.
Yes.
I think I just think am a warmer, more kind person.
Did you witness any changes in societal attitudes during your tenure here? How did you mentioned the stigma earlier? Did you see a change in that?
Some, not huge. I think as the hospital has gotten smaller, well, I know they don't have as many volunteers as they did for whatever reason. But I don't hear people in the community talking about Terrell State Hospital in a negative way now. There's a hospital there.
So you would you say the change was more subtle
Yes.
than something direct?
I can't think of a single sentinel event that happened that changed that. But it just, at one point, Terrell State Hospital was the largest employer in Kaufman County.
Wow.
So, that was a big impact on the community.
Yes. Anything else you can tell me about during your tenure here? Any other experiences that you had with other employees or with patients or with the community that you want to talk about?
We had a good time. I worked really closely with the rehabilitation department in planning activities. Some of those people are still good friends of mine now. And, we laugh about some of the old time things we did, some of the volunteers that we had. We had one lady that came every week, bless her heart, and she was a Red Cross volunteer out of Dallas, to play bridge with patients.
Really?
Yes.
How interesting.
And, every week we'd set her up a bridge tables in the lobby of our building then, and patients would come and she taught them to play bridge and would play every single week with them. And one of my good friends still laughs about making red punch.
Red punch?
We'd, I guess that was the only color punch the state hospital had.
Right.
But, when we had an event with cookies and punch, it was always
I
red
see.
punch.
Okay.
And we still laugh about making gallons of red punch.
Right. Is that something that you drink on a regular occasion?
No. We no longer partake of red punch.
So, when did you retire? What year did you retire?
99.
And what brought that decision about? How did you know it was time?
Well, I had enough years of service, and I was of the age that I could draw my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I had burned out. And I realized I had burned out.
How did that manifest itself?
I didn't enjoy coming to work like I did years before. I enjoyed coming to work. I look forward to coming to work. I look forward to seeing where we could find more money, where we could provide more things for the patients. Back then, we had early on, we had a clothing store where patients could go and shop, quote unquote, for clothing. I don't know how they do it now.
Right.
And that was, fun. I'd go to Dallas and meet people and talk to them about what our needs were, and made friends. I made a lot of friends that way. We'd get new clothing donated from stores. And, it was fun. I felt like I had the best job because it was fun.
I see.
And
so did you realize that, I mean, at some point, did it just hit you that I'm really not enjoying this anymore?
I'm really not enjoying it anymore.
And were there any reasons why
I
that was?
don't think there was anything specific.
Right.
It just was, I think I had burned myself out.
It was just time.
It was just time. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I retired. I knew I was too young to not work.
Right.
And I happened to be working as a volunteer with our Chamber of Commerce. And a woman, I think I'd been retired about 6 months, and a woman left her job at the Chamber, and they called me and asked me if I'd take the job, and I said, sure, why not?
And how long did you work at the Chamber of
10
Commerce?
years.
10 years more. So 40 years altogether in the community working?
I had a total of 41 years of employment.
And you still live in Terrell now?
I still live in Terrell. When I moved here, I thought I was just taking a job and see what happened and maybe move on. I didn't know. But I wouldn't ever think about leaving Terrell now.
And how long did your husband work here?
He worked about 15 years. He worked on the child and adolescent unit. And when our son got to be a teenager, he said, I cannot work with teenagers all day and come home and work with a teenager at night. So he left and opened a private practice here in Terrell.
I see.
And he didn't see children or adolescents until our son was gone from home. He loved working with children and adolescents. And after our son left and was on his own, he would take children and adolescents as clients.
And how long did he serve in private practice?
Oh, he had about 20 years.
Okay.
And we retired at the same time.
Oh, you did? Very good.
And we had things we wanted to do, some traveling, and we bought a motor home and traveled around and saw people. And
What was that like?
it was fun.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. And our primary interest at that time was following NASCAR racing.
Oh, really? So you'd go from one track, one event to
Yeah.
another? Is that how you did?
That's kind of how we did it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, in what ways did your experience here at the hospital affect your subsequent, I'm going to say it right,
Okay.
your subsequent career with the Chamber of Commerce? How did working here, other than the fact that they knew you, and so it was an
It
easy
was a nice
transition?
segue, but
Yes, yes.
basically, my job at the chamber was very similar to what I did here, because I was the director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau,
Oh, wow.
and we had, it was telling people about the community rather than the hospital,
Right.
trying to get people to come and visit. At that time, the chamber had a visitor center out at one of the shopping malls here. It was the only shopping mall at that time. And I had 4 ladies that worked there 7 days a week. And I did a lot of publications. We did a lot of tours of the community. There's a lot of history in Terrell besides the state hospital.
Right.
And that's primarily what brought people to Terrell, was the history. And there was a British flying training school here early on. I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yes, I have.
And so that brought a lot of people
Yes.
to town.
And families, did you have former service members come back and visit? And
A few.
yeah.
Mostly families of the men that were here. But one of the things that I didn't tell you about early on that we established, 2 things that I want to share. In the, I guess, early 90s, mid to early 90s, there's a cemetery here at the hospital
Yes.
with a huge number of patients. And we, the Volunteer Services Council, started a program from numbers to names. And at that point, unless a family member had put a headstone, there were no headstones at the cemetery. There were concrete blocks, a little bit bigger than a brick, with a number. And that number coincided to what was then a paper map that the grounds people kept, with that number grave that corresponded to a catalog that, what department kept that? I can't remember the name of the department that kept that, but they kept a record so that the names and the numbers matched.
Right.
And it was decided that everybody deserved to be recognized and dignified
Yes.
with a name. And we had a lot of volunteers that came and did extensive research under a great deal of supervision, because it was considered, private records.
Right.
And matched numbers to the names. It took a long time to do. And that was encouraged some other facilities that had cemeteries to follow and do the same thing.
When was that occurred?
It was in the mid-90s when that started. And
So up to that time, nobody, none of the patients, anyway, or former patients anyway, had their names.
only if their family members had put a stone.
I see.
And there were very, very few of those.
So after this research was done and the names were laid out for you, what did y'all do?
We had stones made. We raised the money and had a company that had a place here and one in Wills Point to make markers with the patient's name and their birth and death date. And then the company came and placed them. It was an enormous project. It took a lot of money. It took a lot of money to buy that many markers.
I can imagine.
And it was all donated funds.
Do you know what the oldest grave is out there? Do you
I
know
have
that?
known, but I can't tell you right now.
But early
Early,
1900s?
early.
1900s or?
Yes.
Okay.
The hospital opened in 1885, and I would guess it dates pre-1900.
Wow. And did you have an event to kind of open the cemetery up to?
Eventually we did.
Okay.
We raised the money. We offered fence panels, like so many cemeteries do. You know, you could buy
Right.
your fence panel and have your family's name put on it.
Right.
And employees would buy it and have their family name put on it. When my mother passed away, I bought a panel and had her name put on it with donations that had come to me. Some churches would put panels up. It sits way up on a hill at the back of the hospital and has suffered the wrath of hogs and
Wow.
I don't know what all.
Right.
And it's a major upkeep.
I didn't know that that's how that came about, that's how the headstones were actually put out there. So looking back on your career here, what have you seen, what has been the evolution of mental health care as you see it, from the time that you started to the time that you retired, or even up to now?
Well, when I started, there were just a few drugs to treat mental illness. I felt like patients were often over-medicated, but there are more drugs that are not as sedating.
Right.
And there's more interaction with staff and patients because there are more staff members and fewer patients.
Right.
So there's more interaction.
So if given the opportunity to do it all over again, make your 30 years of your 40-year career, would you do it?
Sure.
Do you do the same thing?
I loved my job. I really did love my job. I loved the people. I loved meeting people. I was a very shy child.
Really?
And at some point, something happened. I don't know what happened in my life, but I love to talk to people. I love to meet people. I love to be with people.
Yes.
And so I felt like that was just the right place for me.
So what insights or messages do you have for future generations about behavioral health hospitals or mental health in general, being that your husband's a psychologist? I'm sure you have some insight into that.
I think to keep an open mind, be willing to learn, and not just accept that people are necessarily mentally ill by choice.
Right, very good. Do you have anything that you would like to add that we haven't discussed?
Well, I started to tell you, when I told you about the cemetery, I started to tell you about something else. One of the other big projects that we did, and this was probably in the early 90s also, about the time we were doing the cemetery, was the Family Center. And has anybody talked to you about the Family Center? There needed to be a place where families could meet with the patient that was here. And the service district, we called them the catchment area in that day, was so large that families couldn't just drive here for the day and spend an hour with their patient and drive home. It was too much of a trip. And there were, across campus, there's a I assume the building, I know the building's still there. It was nurses' quarters. And there were dormitory rooms, a line of dormitory rooms, and then there was a large dining room, and then a smaller building that had what I would call double rooms. And the building was not being used for nurses any longer. So we raised funds, and the Meadows Foundation in Dallas was a large contributor to that project, and renovated. The hospital staff did all the renovation of the building. And we raised the money for a lot of the supplies, the furniture, the furnishings, the decor, all of that. And there were probably about 8 or 10 double rooms that families could come and spend the night.
Wow.
And visit with their patients. There were visiting areas. We stocked the kitchen with basic things, you know, soups and little things, coffee and that kind of thing, that they could have while they were here. And we did a lot of the families, you know, had young children. It might be a mother here, and the father would come with maybe grandparents to visit and the child to visit. And we did a playroom, so the children would have a place to play when their families were visiting. And we had some really creative people that at one end of that room built a bookshelf that looked like a house and did a great job on it. And that was it was a fun project. And I think they used that for the visitor center up until they moved the visitor center to this room, to this building.
I see.
And but all of that was done except for the labor with volunteer funds.
My goodness.
You know, at some point I wish I could go back and figure out how much money we raised in 30 years.
Right. It sounds like a lot. What do you think of the new hospital?
I'm excited about it.
How has that impacted the community?
Everybody's curious. You know, they did have a groundbreaking, and this people in Austin have come and had community meetings, and so people have seen the plans. And the bigger question that people have is, what are they going to do with all those old buildings? And I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if anybody does.
Right. I don't either.
So, and you know, there's a lot of ground here.
Right. Yes, there is.
And I don't know what they're going to do with it either. But that, you know, I think the community is really accepting of the hospital as a whole now. People aren't scared.
Right. It seems to be a really important part of the community. And within the community, maybe much less stigmatized than without. So that it's really
it's
interesting.
it's a change.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think I saw in Jerry Vick's interview about the bell ringing.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, my neighbors would say, "Oh, somebody's escaped."
It's lunchtime or somebody escaped. Right.
So, but, you know, when I came to work here, the dairy was still operational. And one of the funniest stories about the dairy was there evidently was they made ice cream, and it was delicious. But there was a certain type of oil that had to be used in the ice cream making machines. And when the food service people turned that order in to supply thought it was too expensive. So they ordered WD-40
Oh my goodness.
to all the ice cream machines.
Wow.
So that didn't quite work.
I guess not.
So it's funny how you remember those
Just those little things, right?
from the past.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed, and I appreciate your time and your insight
Well,
to the
I
hospital.
enjoyed it. I still love the hospital.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.